concept began. But I wanted to let you know, I am going to spoil, so if you haven't read some of these comics, I'm going to tell the plots, I'm going to tell the surprise characters, things of that nature. So, just fair warning, I will reveal lots of stuff that is in the comics. So, if you want to follow up, of course, these are still available at the club store. And without further ado, this is the outline, so I'm going to kind of just read along with you. So the goals when we went to Hasbro and to start the comic as part of the club license, we had to outline some of the goals, and all content had to be approved by Hasbro. So when we go have our meetings, we would give an outline and say, this is, the series we want to spotlight or the characters we want to spotlight. And then the big thing that we wanted to stay connected to is make sure that we held to the original 80s and 90s Marvel Comics continuity. So we didn't want to do, an outside the universe. We wanted to stay really close to what Larry Hama had established and not step on any toes of, if he had a character killed in action, we would respect that. If he brought him back, they would eventually, return in our comic as well. So we tried to do a parallel series, so similar to what he did with Special Missions, that's what our comic was basically entailing. And again, the products that we included were our annual convention and our club exclusives for each of the designated years. And of course, the big thing with those is we would do the modern era characters, and then we'd also have the teams that may have never been shown or spotlighted in the Marvel Comics, and of course anything that had expanded team members, we would also want to spotlight and have them be a main part of the storyline. And then, of course, if you don't know me, I like to put Easter eggs in all the publications, so we will discuss those as we go along. And the big thing was to acknowledge and kind of give a shout out to the hardcore fans that would recognize if we put a character that had not been made into a figure, either in the overall G.I. Joe universe and or hadn't appeared in any of the previous comics or in a special team. Okay, so again, the concept storyline really began in, if you recall, we did a series called Operation Voth. Raise your hand if you remember that. Outstanding. So this concept was 4 different box sets that had 2 figures, and they each had a designated theme, whether it was Arctic, if it was the jungle, if it was the Pacific with Shipwreck and Chuckles being the spotlight of that. So when we had that as the quarterly club exclusive, I had this great story dreamed in the back of my head how all those sets interconnected and how the storyline would have followed with Chuckles and Shipwreck going to the different locations and fighting those specific Cobra characters. I really wanted to get that put into a comic book, but that year when we went to Hasbro, we shared, okay, we're going to release these box sets with the 2 figures, can we do a comic? And unfortunately at the time, we weren't allowed to do that. So they said, well, maybe check back the next year. So that was 2008, and when we went in and said, okay, well this year this is the plans for our convention set, and we're going to do a return of, what we want to do, a return of DEF style headhunters. And of course, we were given a big stamp of no. We could not do anything that would have the drug connotation, so we couldn't do anything that would involve the term drug elimination force. So we had to come up with something that still included those characters, but was a twist, and that's when we came up with the G.I. Joe SWAT acronym, and that allowed us to use the DEF-style characters, give it a different title, and yet have them versus the headhunters. But then again, we could not do anything with the headhunters that involved any illicit drugs or anything that would impact negatively with the Hasbro Public Relations. When they did the 90s series, Hasbro had partnered with the Drug Council, so that was a positive PR thing. for us to try to do it again, there was no real benefit, so that's why that was not allowed. So when we came up with, or when we were approved, and we had to come up with a story, well, what would the headhunters be doing? Well, we said, well, if they can't do anything drug-related, they still can be doing, pirated products or doing components to weapons. And so that's how that part of the storyline was put together. And then they said, well, this sounds like it's got a strong plot line. Maybe we can do a comic and release that along with the convention set. And we said, well, who would write it? And we said, well, of course, the first person we'd think of to start our comic series would be Larry Hama. So, of course, we reached out to Larry. We said, we have this the storyline, we have these characters. Could you step in and put the words to these characters and the scenes and the actions to have a comic book? But, of course, Larry doesn't like to follow an outline story as we had it made. He likes to evolve, page by page. So that was a little bit of a conflict and a learning experience, and we had to work around his storyline and make sure it still hit all the key points of what we had with the toys for that year's convention set. So we gave him the plot. Of course, this was something that was key to the storyline is, these Joe SWAT team members go into a location and the headhunters, set a trap and surround them. And so this was, I think it might be my bad artwork, so excuse that. But that was just something roughly that we said. This is the outline of what the story would be. The guys being surrounded, the odds against them, and how they would have to fight their way out. Now we've got to the artwork point, and again we had Larry look at some of the early pencils, and this was the first artist rendition of my idea of having the Joe SWAT team members surrounded. So these are a couple of the ideas that the artist sketched out for us to look at and approve. And this is the first official cover. So for our 2008 convention issue, this was the fully painted artwork without any of our graphics. And of course it spotlights, if you see Gristle's on the second tier there, he's got his headhunter troops, and then of course we've got the three main G.I. Joe SWAT members from that convention year that were souvenirs. We've got, Shockwave, we've got Lowlight, and of course we got to do an updated version of Long Arm and more traditional military colors. And I don't want to read us along, so if you don't know the plot synopsis or what the solicitation for that story was, give you a quick rundown. So there's the specifications, the title, the writer, the artist, and a quick breakdown of what the plot line was. And then when we went to the artist to start drawing the pages, this is again their first rendition of what the first page of the script would kind of set up, the reintroduction of Gristle, since if you followed any of the cartoon series, of course the headman at the end was either captured or taken out of the picture. So our story with the return of the headhunters is now Gristle, his lieutenant, had taken over operations and was running his own illicit activities, manufacturing weapon components. And that's a close-up of the panel. Initially, our outreach was to artists that were up and coming, so you'll see the progression as we gain more experience. And again, we wanted to spotlight the characters that were in the convention set. So again, not having Gristle appear in other comics, this was great to see him actually, in a color storyline. And then the big reveal for the box set that year was the addition of the vintage style O-ring bats, but we had updated them in the Headhunter unique decos which was the gray, and then they had the Headhunter logo on their chest, and that was a neat addition that we were able to include. And so, of course, they played a key factor in there, and Larry had some fun coming up with the factory idea and how they would be an assembly line, and how they would be manufacturing these components to keep the activities and the money flow for the enemy team, and then the Joes would have to come in and stop that. Now, the first time we had the convention program version, and then we released the retail edition at a later time. This is the retail cover that goes through the diamond solicitation. So again, that's the full painted artwork without any of the titles or logos on it. And of course, we had a special artist, Bob McLeod, did the kind of a closer version of the storyline. And on the, again, retail edition, you need to be able to get a broader audience. So we had to really spotlight that the story involved Cobra Commander ultimately allowing the headhunters to come in and do manufacturing, and he was still making the profits from them. And again, when if someone hadn't been coming to the convention or following what G.I. Joe had been doing at the time period, they could still see a recognizable character on the cover and hopefully interest them in buying it. And when we also do the diamond retail editions, instead of the program in the back of the comic, we would able additional pages space to include character dossiers and unique artwork that was specific to the issue. So again, we had G.I. Joe SWAT team members, and we had individual artwork drawn for them, and then we would do full page profiles or give their character dossiers similar to what had been released at the convention in the file card formats. Now, if you also remember, in 2008, the club released a set of DTC stood for direct to consumer, and that's something Hasbro had been releasing through their various outlets. And they had a fourth wave of figures that ultimately got canceled. And when we met with them, we had heard, the fan feedback of wanted to see the last characters actually get produced, and we were able to secure that and get those in as another quarterly exclusive, where we split these up in 2 figure releases, and they were separately carded. But again, since they had no real background story, and there was some new characters, specifically the Munitia hadn't had her backstory really explained, we thought this was a great opportunity to also do a comic. And this was our idea for a DTC comic, and of course we changed the DTC acronym to be Direct to Cobra, and that was a quick synopsis of what the plot line included. And it also has the writers and the artists as we made that combination and started working on the book. And here is a 2-piece example of the first cover for our quarterly comic that was basically a 2-issue special edition release. And again, it focused on characters that were part of our quarterly exclusives. And we have the pencils and then the final artwork without any graphics here. And then we had a nice spotlight with Lieutenant Falcon, Outback, and Airtight. And again, they were the figures from those exclusives. But we threw in, and as I mentioned before, Dave Lane liked to throw in some Easter eggs. So we said, well, let's get the Python Patrol in their second version outfits into the story and have that be their nemesis. And that also allowed us to add an additional figure to the DTC line, which was a Python Patrol Copperhead. Oh, and another thing, if you notice, he's actually standing on what would have been the vehicle that we tried to do, and that was I think it was the Valorverse Venom. I don't remember the patrol boat that had Shipwreck included in there. That was an idea that we thought might have been a good exclusive, but it never worked out with the factory having those parts. We tried to remove some of the action feature components, and again, you know, the cost of removing things or changing things didn't meet that quarterly budget. And again, an example of like the first page and how we started out the plot line having the Cobra Commander be, again, the focus of the story of how he had hired or was trying to hire and acquire some secret package and had sent his troops out to make sure he got that. And when we had the chance to, again, do some little Easter egg cameos, we included several characters that later on we were able to actually make into toys and different uniforms. So again, this was our first move in that direction of, you know, let's put these unique characters into the storyline, and then if, you know, fan feedback or club member feedback says, you know, let's make that into a figure, we would try to do that. This was one of the pinups that was included in the issue. Some of you might recognize that name. This, again, when Jamie was first starting out as an artist, and right now he's obviously had a lot of popular comic covers and pinup pages for various Marvel and other comic series, but he actually did some of the artwork on this issue and did an interesting pinup for us as well. So I think this was the first time we're showing the first stage of that artwork, and then I think the final colored version will obviously be in the issue. And that was part one, so we had to finish up part two, the Direct to Cobra series. We have the title, and of course there's the breakdown of the writers, the art, and then the quick synopsis of the storyline. And then here is the artist rendition of what we offered, what the plot line was going to be, and then the actual painted color artwork without any of the graphics that we later have our logos and everything. So we actually got Tim Seeley, who was working previously on the Devil's Due G.I. Joe comic series. So we brought him over to do a special cover for us. And of course we wanted to spotlight the female characters. We had the Munitia as being, you know, the main female adversary in the storyline. And then we, of course, wanted to do a return to Lady J in what we had offered in a 2003 convention set, and that was her in a unique camo uniform, and so that's why she was spotlighted in this issue and had a unique uniform. It was actually kind of a nod back to what we had released in a previous convention set. And looking at the first page artwork, so it was kind of an interesting story where we had a two-sided mission where we have Falcon and Lady J capturing one of the Cobra agents, and on the other side you have Cobra Commander, and again, Easter egg, threw dice in there, and of course later on, you know, we were able to get the first modern era version of dice into an FSS series. And again, we had page space to include extra dossiers after the second issue, and this is the color artwork that included those dossiers. So again, we were able to expand on the file cards that were released on both the convention set specific Lady J, and of course the Munitia that was part of the DCTC exclusive set. And moving on to the next year, 2009, we were able to continue doing the comic series, and that was the feature for the Crimson team, and we wanted to again spotlight a storyline that was unique and followed the characters that were in the box set in a new version and a location-specific mission that allowed us to, again, reach out and grab things that only hardcore fans may remember. Again, there's the quick outline if you wanted to read through. It gives the specifics. You have the title, the writers, and then a breakdown. And what I had mentioned, the mission-specific location happened to be Argentina, which hadn't been really shown in previous comic stories, so we wanted to make sure it was a unique enough location that allowed us to bring in some unique characters. And the storyline involved Baroness and the Crimson Twins, and so this is like the first piece of the artwork that we would approve, and then of course we go to the color process. And then there's what I was mentioning, the Easter egg special thing. Since we had done the Crimson Strike team as an O-ring convention set, we were basically, at the time, budget constraints required us to do the return of the Crimson Strike team, but I knew once people, swallowed that we were doing a rehash of the box set, I wanted to make sure that all the souvenirs had a unique impact and that they were definite must-buys and not just filler, and that was the inclusion of international figures for the first time in the modern era. And specifically, we had a 2-pack here that features Manley, and then we had Starduster. He was in some mini comics, but hadn't really had any comics that really showed him using the jetpack, and we involved him in the storyline, so they had partnered up. They had mission-specific uniforms, and then also we had other team members that included figures that for the first time were released in the modern era from Argentinian exclusive figures from back in the day. And again, we go into, later in that year, we released a Diamond Edition version, and this time we pulled a special artist, and that was Greg Horn, to do the cover as well with a specific Baroness in the Crimson uniform. And again, this was something that's supposed to attract readers when they're going down the aisle, and they may not be G.I. Joe fans already, so this cover would obviously attract them. It's like, oh, well, I remember Baroness from the cartoon, maybe I'll check out this comic book. So that's the idea when we release it to a retailer or through another comic store that would get some eyes on the books and allow a new generation of fans to be interested in G.I. Joe. And again, since it was the retail edition, there was no convention program information, and we had page space to include extra dossiers. So here are two of the fully colored dossier artwork. So in the comic, of course, we had text running alongside them. So here are them separated. And you may notice we also included another international character where we brought in some of the Action Force characters. So there's Blades, and we wanted to include the Argentinian pilot. So that's Glenda. And then the following year, we got to do comics in the Club magazine. And we had to plan that out to try to maximize our 12 monthly issues to have a storyline that most fans could follow, and hopefully they had a continuous run and they didn't miss any of the pages to complete the story. And when we first announced that we were going to do Big Lob for the first time, he was an O-ring style figure, and we wanted to do a comic that kind of followed his exploits. And the original idea was to have him kind of be the goofball he was personified in the animated movie, and so we kind of had a story that wasn't fully serious. That had some little joke lines and things that we thought would be just kind of a nod to the character and having him in a comic for the first time. But we got feedback right away. No. Club members wanted to see a more serious version, and so we immediately, were able to switch the tail end of the story and make the mission more serious, and again have extra cameos of characters that would later on be optioned as figures. And specifically, there is obviously our Law and Order. So that year for the convention, we had for the first time delved over to, again, the international market since our souvenirs from the previous year had sold so well. We wanted to do, again, an option with Action Force characters, and unfortunately we didn't have the rights, so we had to change their acronym to SAF, which stood for Special Action Force. And for the cover, we had a unique storyline that involved Black Major and his Red Shadows for the first time released over here in the United States as a convention exclusive. We did go back to the O-ring format based on club member convention attendee feedback. So we offered one last hurrah since Hasbro had already moved on to the modern era 25th anniversary sculpts. We wanted to throw one more bone out to the hardcore O-ring collectors, and that was this set. And again, we wanted to branch and give O-ring collectors one final group of figures that were unique to their displays and how they would have kind of a broadening world view, and that was bringing in also the Action Man character of Natalie Poole. And Action Man had a cartoon series that had the female counterpart to the main name character, and that was a female blonde counterpart. And we were able to bring her into the storyline as well, and have that be part of the focus of what the guy in the background there is the Cobra Interrogator, have a story that involved him eventually using mind control to acquire his own double agent. And there's the rundown story. So we have the official title and everything that was solicited. We have the writers, the artwork, and the story synopsis. And again, this is the first time as we were able to continue the comic series. We got Sheldon Go, who had started his artwork through the Hasbro 25th anniversary comic packs. So some of those additional half stories were done by him, specifically the Falcon vs. Nemesis Immortal. So that was his first gig for Hasbro, and we thought his artwork was unique enough that we brought him over to start working on the club comics. And again, here's the pencils that he provided us, and that is the start of the storyline. We had Flint going on a vacation and meeting up with Natalie Poole, and they ran amok of the interrogator doing a mild-mannered German tourist person that was kind of leading them out into a Red Shadows trap. And here's an action panel, again, without any of the word bubbles or dialogue. And again, it spotlights the storyline where Flint fell into a Red Shadows trap, and we have him battling and eventually being subdued, and the Black Major, of course, gloating in his victory. And then we released the Diamond Edition. That's the retail edition later that year. So again, the first comic cover, it was the convention program for that year, and then later on we released it to all the comic store retailers that want to purchase it. And our key focus again is something that will attract readers that aren't necessarily G.I. Joe fans, and give them at least a character they remember as being, Flint, the guy with the beret, and then of course they'd be curious who those guys in the red uniforms were, since they weren't Cobra guys. And again, removing the program content in the back, we were adding the dossiers as we continued, and here are two specific. We have Natalie Poole in an action scene, and then one of the Special Action Force characters that we had in that comic, and that was also one of the convention souvenirs, and that is Jammer. And following the next year, in 2011, after we finished the Big Lob storyline, we moved to our next year's club exclusive figure, which was the modern era dial tone, and we we had a story that ran through that year's monthly club magazine that involved a mission with Dial Tone, and he returned to go side by side with the SWAT team from the previous convention series. So we had a chance to continue the storyline of the Shockwave and Lowlight, and they were the key parts of the mission. And of course, Dial Tone, held his communications device to make sure that they didn't run amok of any of the Cobra traps that had been planted. And again, we were able to put in some Easter eggs that later on we were able to actually make into figures. And that moves to the 2011 convention program cover. And this was a return to Mission Brazil Part 2. So we wanted to, again, take the figures that we had planned for the convention set and expand on a Toys R Us exclusive box set that included one unique character, Captain Claymore, and then some of the recolored uniforms from figures that had been released along the Hasbro toy line. And this one where we wanted to, again, feature with some international characters. And we have one of the Brazilian characters, and then of course we wanted to update the Python Patrol, so we wanted to make sure we got in the key Python Patrol members. So we've got Telly Viper, and we also had that year for convention souvenirs, we had the troopers, the officers, and again we wanted to expand that roster with some additional international figures. And there's the breakdown again of the 2011 comic. Again, title, writers, artists, and there's the name Captain Claymore. So this was probably the first time that Captain Claymore was shown in a comic, and we were proud to be able to make an action figure and showcase him in a comic story. And here is a panel without any of the dialogue, word bubbles, or action scenes, just to give you an idea of the storyline. That's actually Dial Tone that's being interrogated or captured and tormented, basically egging Captain Claymore out of retirement to come and save one of his former teammates. And as we followed that year, we did a Diamond Edition retail release, and we did the flip side. So during the convention, we had the Cobra Adversaries. So at the retail side, we wanted to showcase the G.I. Joe characters. So we had Captain Claymore. We have, as you recall, Wetsuit without his frog gear, and that was very well received to have the wetsuit not in a wetsuit, and give him his full face and have a real Navy SEAL on land uniform. And then the new character we introduced was also an international figure, and that was Sparta, and she was a key piece of that storyline as well. And again, without any of the program information, we added the dossiers. So there's two nice dossier artwork pieces without any of the text of Captain Claymore and Sparta in action poses. And moving right along, 2012 we continued our magazine comic, and again we wanted to focus on the specific club exclusive for that year, and that was Footloose, the first modern era release. And we did a storyline in the monthly magazine comic that paired him against one of the figures that Hasbro had released during their Pursuit of the Cobra line, and that was Shadow Tracker. So again, that's the first time that character was shown at all in a comic, so we were able to add those two pieces together to make a great story. So that year for our convention, we did the overwhelmingly popular October Guard in the modern era design, and we featured a story that actually went back in time. A lot of times, again, going back to that first slide, we had to follow the original Marvel Comics continuity. So of course in the original Marvel Comics, again spoiler alert, the original October Guard team had been killed in action, and only a portion of its team remained, but we wanted to showcase the characters that were in the box set, so we had to tell a story that actually was a flashback, and that allowed us to add the Colonel Breckoff and Horror Show and some of the very popular characters that Larry really showcased in the Marvel comic book, and also had a close representation in a couple of the cartoon episodes, and a lot of fans, responded very, very well to getting these figures into their hands, since at the time there was only the O-ring attempts to do close versions, but not exact to what the fans had been wanting. And there's your story breakdown. Our issue numbers and the solicitation information with title, the writer, the artist, and then what the story involved. And one of the key characters in that comic set, convention set, was a new character called General Iron Bear, and that was the secret leader of the October Guard, and that's what the story involved. We wanted to introduce him and make him the actual boss that has been running all the operations for the Warsaw Pact team, and how they were able to, have different entanglements with the Joe team throughout the Marvel Comics, so that kind of tied it all together in a nice bow. And there's a panel, just close-up of some of the action that was involved. We were able to go back and do an unreleased version of the Iron Grenadiers, a set of figures that Hasbro had planned and then canceled. We were able to get those new parts and put those into the troop builders in that convention set. So that was unique long coats on the Iron Grenadiers, and we also put the Destro, what we call the prototype logo, before he officially became, fully running Mars, and would have a different logo in the future. And the Diamond Edition cover, for the first time, we had Robert Atkins do the artwork for that retail release. And again, an overview of the storyline involved the Voltar, that's Destro's general, also had perished in the Marvel Comics. So again, another reason why it was a flashback story. And we were able to get him as the key nemesis that Colonel Breckoff had to thwart to save his boss. And again, following the removal of program information, we have the bonus dossiers. So there is Iron Bear, so that's the October Guard General that we released. And then, of course, one of Destro's elite Annihilators, and that was also a convention souvenir pack that year. So again, we were able to do the toys and then also spotlight them in the comic. And the following year, in 2013, we did the continuing stories in the magazine comic. And this time it spotlighted the figure that was coming out, and it was actually Modern Era Iceberg. But guess what? Easter egg, look who's at the top. Both characters at the top, major Easter eggs, because we wound up doing both of those later on. So this was, again, just characters that we put into the comic to kind of see what fan reaction would be, and maybe fans had told us, it'd be cool if you made that Mindbender in the coat from the movie, or it'd be cool if you made that Ice Viper in that officer gear. So this was maybe the Easter egg attempt to see what fan reaction was, and obviously it was positive that we were able to do these later. So going into that convention that year, we went over to the special team of Night Force, and we were able to include several characters that may have not appeared in the Night Force sub-team through Hasbro. And specifically, we included Lady J again, popular character. And we had all the main characters, and then again, extras that we'd include. Chuckles had involvement in the storyline as well. And there again is the synopsis and breakdown for our solicitation purposes. And again, that gives the official title. Our cameraman here, Jesse, helped write the story, so give him props. And then again, we kept Sheldon on with the artwork. And then we returned to introduce a new character, that was the Crimson Asp. And there she is. So this was a special character that the club was able to release, a female Cobra agent that was a mercenary, and although her name is Crimson, she doesn't wear a red uniform, she just has red hair, and we thought it would be really cool to have a female with an eye patch, and so that's how that idea kind of developed or started from. And then again, there hadn't been Cobra agents in green, so again, that was something we thought would be unique and that fans would react to and make it very special for that convention set. And there was our Diamond Edition retail release, and again we brought Robert Atkins back to do the cover artwork, and of course to key in, we had Crimson Asp as the foreground character, but of course we have to have characters that general, maybe not fans of, you know, the ongoing G.I. Joe series, to give them some nostalgia. Remember, oh yeah, I remember, you know, Baroness Zorana, and of course we snuck our own exclusive munition in the background there. So that again, that's the reason mainly we want to keep characters that both sides of the fence would enjoy. So hardcore fans know what they are, and then, you know, casual fans would pick it up because of their interest. And again, putting dossiers into the comic, here's a shot of our Night Force Lady J. That was first time unique uniform for her, and we got the Night Force logo on her cap as well. And then moving into the next year, our 2014 magazine comic, this brought in the first time we started including our figure subscription service figures into the storyline. So of course we have featured of Cross Country was the membership figure that year, but we included various characters from our FSS, which that is Barrel Roll without his flight gear, and then we also have what we call Tan Grunt, the glider pilot, so that's Tan Grunt without his gear. And for the first time again, something that Hasbro had released during that year was a Data Viper. So this is the first chance we had to include one of the mainline products that fit into our storyline. So the first time that character appeared in a comic book. And that year we went zombie crazy. So we went with a zombie theme, and again that was based on fan feedback and reaction to one of the Hasbro concept case from the previous year. Each year we collected data to try to come up with the option to provide to Hasbro to get approval for a convention set. Overwhelmingly, the previous year, everybody wrote, you know, zombies from the concept case, zombies from the concept case. So we were able to work some of those into both the box set and as souvenirs. And of course, we wanted to follow some of the popular comic books at retail and do a toy cover, and that's why the toys were featured on this program. And there's your 2014 comics story synopsis and background information for solicitation purposes. And again, we had Jesse as our writer, continuing with Sheldon. And there's the breakdown of how the secret ingredient of Compound Z that would turn anybody that it touches into a zombie. And here's some color panels from that storyline. We were able to include on the Joe side the return of ECO, even though we changed what the acronym stood for, so it was no longer necessarily environmental. I believe it stood for Emergency Chemical Operations, and that had something to do again with their return to fight the chemical that was Compound Z, which was the zombie goo that would follow the storyline and have these guys battle. And if you have close eyes, you can see that we had Outback in that storyline, and this again was kind of a setup to an Easter egg. In our story, Outback, you know, was in his survival mode, and he didn't have any of the special gear the rest of the Eco Warrior team had, and so he gets doused with some Compound Z. What could that effect be? And 2014's Diamond Edition cover. We had Tim Seeley come back for that one. And then here we go with the spotlight of the main eco-warrior characters without their helmets on. And again, that would hopefully have people on the retail side recognize Flint. And then, obviously The Walking Dead and other zombie comics. Anybody that was interested in that genre hopefully would take a look at our book as well. And again, placing program data, we had our dossiers in the back, and here's two beautiful pieces of artwork that showcase some of the characters that were in the convention set and the story. And we have our old zombie dog and his boss, which was Repulsor, and then a Toxo zombie. Moving along, 2015, we continued our monthly magazine comic, and that year, there we go, we were able to complete that dream wish of having Dr. Mindbender in the winter coat that was first shown in the animated movie. So having that as the main focus of the storyline, again, we wanted to acknowledge the FSS characters that we had previously released, and that was bringing Iron Claw into what, again, I would consider the Marvel continuity. So again, not stepping on anything or changing, but not necessarily acknowledging that in G.I. Joe Extreme it was a future, even though it was current modern date. We brought him in as an adversary, or at least an annoyance for Cobra Commander, and that in this storyline we actually had Dr. Mindbender jump sides and go work for Iron Claw. So that year, or the following, we had our next set, which included Iron Grenadiers. And again, that was another popular set that we wanted to bring unique characters back into. And we were able to do an updated version since we had General Mayhem as an O-ring figure. We wanted to do a modern era release, and so that's where he's spotlighted in that story. And then we brought a modern era Metalhead in our Iron Grenadiers deco, and then we wanted to do a female Iron Grenadier, and that's when we did the Undertow Officer. There's your breakdown for issue 8. And this issue we had, again, Jesse, and this time we had Robert do the comic, and unfortunately his schedule was impacted, and we only were able to do a 10-page preview, and he had to finish the story later on. So again, that's some of the behind-the-scenes information of why that story was kind of truncated, and we did finish that up when we followed up with our retail release. And there's an example of some of his artwork spotlighting the Tiger Force team members, and those were also convention souvenirs at that time. And our Diamond Edition release. And again, when you go to retail, you want a character that casual fans can recognize, so that we have Cobra Commander spotlighted in the background, and then the old Springfield Times of some of the Tiger Force characters getting the old blade. And again, that was kind of an inside joke. Of course, if you notice, Cobra Commander has a key, and that was one of our PR things, where we actually had one of our cosplayers go to the mayor of Springfield, and he was given the key to the city. The joke of, Cobra's everywhere, because there's a Springfield in almost every city. And 2016, following our magazine stories on our monthly period, we brought Pythona as our first release for that membership figure, and that was again based on annual reminders from the convention goers and club members that they wanted to see some of the animated movie characters in plastic form. And we had said all the previous years, well, that's going to cost a lot of extra tooling dollars, so you have to basically show us that there's enough interest and, add to our membership numbers and prove that point, and you guys did, so congrats. So we saw a lot of increase in membership, and that allowed us to push those tooling dollars over to get additional parts and do first release Modern Era Pythona. And then, of course, we showcased her in the comic story, and going back to what happened to Outback from that zombie goo. Well, there we go. That was an Easter egg. We were eventually going to do the Tiger Force Outback who had the white hair, and that was the reasoning we came up with of why that happened. So there you go. The O-ring version, of course, was a European release, and it was never explained why his drastic hair color had changed. So we gave it a reason, even though retcon, decades later. Moving on, 2016, we have the G.I. JoeCon cover, and that featured our Sky Patrol team. And so we've got two vehicle action spotlight of the new character that was introduced in our Sky Patrol set. The pilot that was basically the test pilot that took over the key focus of the story that the rest of the Sky Patrol had to go rescue from the clutches of Cobra. And there's that full breakdown for issue 9, Project Downfall. Again, we had Jesse as our writer, and we tried a new artist again to shake things up, and broke down the story and tried to include the location, which we tried to do each year if it worked out. So they actually were in the same location of Colorado where the convention was that year. And some of the panel artwork without any graphics or dialogue. Action scene with the Sky Patrol Sky Striker, and our Cobra was a Sky Serpent. I was getting tongue-tied there. And that was a unique vehicle and pilot that was part of the convention souvenir releases that year. And for the Diamond Edition release, again, spotlighting Cobra Commander because he's a well-known character, even if you're not a fan of G.I. Joe. And the shtick, we had him playing with the Sky Patrol figures. So that's kind of the scenes of how that cover came along. And the following year, going into our magazine comic, we wanted to tie up some loose ends. Actually, that stemmed from a lot of questions we'd gotten from convention goers and club members of whatever happened to Natalie Poole. It's been a couple of years and we haven't heard from her, and interrogators still have her, and what's that going? Where is she? Is she coming back? Are you going to make a figure of her? Well, we were able to bring her into the storyline, and yes, she was still a pawn in the interrogator's plan, and she actually is a major part of the story that was able to thwart G.I. Joe security and have the interrogator's plan to rescue some of his troops out of a Joe prison. And for that year's convention, this is the artwork without any titles, and that is Battle Force 2000. And again, staying very securely with Marvel continuity. They had perished in Larry's storyline, so we had to do a retro or flashback story. And so this was a mission that had been classified for decades and was being retold through the memories of the key member of Battle Force 2000 that survived, and that was Dodger. And there's some behind-the-scenes artwork of Dodger being interrogated by the Cobra interrogator. And what was the whole thing he was after? It was a large diamond that was part of a massive Cobra weapon. And in our monthly comic, we continued that plot line. And we wanted to, again, keep the convention comic tied into our monthly comic. So that brings us to this year, so 2018, our G.I. Joe Con cover, and the previous year again, since we had been informed that we were going to be going away, we weren't able to do a diamond edition last year, or won't be able to do one this year either. So the convention program is the only version of the comic that we were able to produce. So this year, as a final hurrah, we wanted to go back and do a very nostalgic 1985 Yo-Joe style pose with the Slaughters Marauders team replicating that famous cross-sell Hasbro catalog. So you've got all the main characters from this year's convention set giving their hand raised in victory. So this brings us to what we're doing this year, the storyline we've been going through with our 2018 magazine, and we've been doing Strife and Unification, and that is a rundown of how Cobra Commander, since another series has been kind of shown as a fool, this time in our story he has been pulling all his strings back and having characters that hadn't had much action or spotlight, pulling them back into the fray to accomplish tasks, which goes all the way back to the previous year of having Pythona fighting Outback for a meteorite core sample, and that was part of our story line this year that had Cobra Commander tracking down where the meteorite core fragments had gone so he could acquire that as a power source. So we're going here. This is a sneak peek for next month's comic story, and this is the direction Cobra Commander has been working towards, and that was building a space station with Mars and or Destro. And we have one of the figures that we had wanted to do, and that was Hotwire. We had an O-ring version, and unfortunately we never got around to getting the funding to do a modern era with a new head. But we wanted to kind of tie up loose ends and bring him back into the fray to at least have him close out our comic series, and where he's going with the plans for the space station. So this will be coming up in the July issue, and we want to again tie up as much of the previous stories that we could, and bring it full circle so we have a tightly knit appreciation for everybody that has followed all the convention set and club exclusives over the years. So that is the rundown. We are up to date. I appreciate everybody coming and listening and giving me a little walk through memory lane on all the special comics. Have a great convention. Thanks so much.